2, 1.
So good afternoon. My name is Mark Brodzinski. I'm the Acting Administrator for the Rural Business Cooperative Service here with USDA. I welcome you this afternoon to our webinar on the Bni CARES Act program. We're glad to have you join us. Just kind of monitoring our webinar, we see we still have a few of the audience connecting, but we're going to roll with some introduction comments and have them catch up as we go forward. To kick off the agenda today, what I'd like to do is, first of all, introduce Betty Brand. Betty serves as the Deputy Undersecretary for USDA Rural Development Mission Area. Betty came to us to USDA after 35 years experience with the Farm Credit of the Virginias, where she served most recently as a Chief Advocate for agricultural industry, rural businesses, and supporting agricultural producers and businesses at the state and national level. Since her arrival here with USDA in 2018, Betty has focused on USDA Rural Development's mission of supporting rural America with a commitment to improving the economy and quality of life for rural communities, along with increasing rural communities' access to capital and a strong focus on effective and efficient customer service. In her short term here with USDA over the couple of years, Betty has led the department initiatives establishing a memorandum of understanding, strengthening engagement with the Department of Energy and with the Small Business Administration. These collaborations between departments enable greater synergies between our government agencies and really increased our successful outcomes of federal programs and services. Betty continues to lead our mission-critical priorities and strategies, focusing on effective delivery of USDA rural development programs and our services to rural communities. For some opening remarks and introductions of our Bni CARES Act program, Betty, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you all for joining us today. It is a real pleasure to be here on the call with you, and I must say that it's an incredible team here at USDA Rural Development, and this program and standing it up so quickly, and now the outreach that's being done to make sure that our rural communities, our producers, and customers and stakeholders know about this program has really, the team has been remarkable in getting it taken care of, making it available, and communicating to everyone to be able to be sure that everyone has access. You know, not only do we have lenders on this call and producers, but also community leaders participating today, and I wish we could be together in person. However, we're not able to do that for a number of reasons, but it's still great to be on the call and communicating. In the meantime, technology does enable us to get the job done, and just want you to know that we are getting it done, not just in this program, but other areas, so that we can really help make an impact and improve the prosperity of rural communities. I will say that there are over 700 people on the call so far today. I think there are close to 1,000 that are registered. And it's so great to see so many different groups across the country are joining. And in addition to lenders and producers on the call, it's great to see that there are state and local governments, nonprofits, tribal organizations, and businesses all joining us today to learn more about this program. So, and I want to let you know, too, that this is about the 6th or 7th webinar that we have hosted, and we have one more at least tomorrow, but thank you for participating and allowing us the opportunity to share with you the information about the program. You know, if you've worked with us before in rural development and are part of the rural development family, you're probably familiar with how we support the economy and quality of life in America's small towns and farming communities. But some of you on the call may be a new lender, maybe a new organization, maybe a producer, because it's not typical for us to be able to finance producer loans, and Mark and team will get into more explanation on that. You may be new to our programs, and we're excited to be able to share a little bit about what we do, and just want to give you a really special welcome and a quick 30,000-foot view of the work that we do here at Rural Development. Our mission is to help improve the economy and the quality of life in rural America through financial support and investment and business and economic development, community facilities, housing, and infrastructure. And infrastructure includes water, electricity, and broadband. So the new loan guarantees under the Bni CARES Act directly supports this mission. As Secretary Perdue said in his announcement about a little more than a week ago, that providing this much-needed capital in these unprecedented times is a cornerstone of our commitment to all aspects of the rural economy. On behalf of the Rural Development Team, I want you to know that we work tirelessly beside you to put this critical funding to work as soon as possible. Together, this work will result in over $1 billion in loan guarantees leveraged to positively impact our rural economy. I know how much your communities need this help. Most of us who work for rural development either live in or grew up in the areas we support. We take our work personally, and it means a lot to us. This is a very challenging time for our country, and your federal government has taken unprecedented steps to help Americans through this economic devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. The CARES Act did not forget rural America, and I commend Congress for channeling this critical support through our office. It's what we are made to do. So now I'll turn things back to Kate to dig into the details, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Betty. And we are glad to have each of you joining us today. A couple of housekeeping things. You've entered this webinar with all participant audio lines muted. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat box located at the bottom right of your screen. We will address those questions during the closing Q&A session. Any questions that we're not able to address today will be answered through email follow-up. Within 48 hours, you will receive an email with the link to access both the webinar recording and the PowerPoint. Thank you again for taking time to join us, and back to you now, Mark.
Thank you, Kate. I think that was a great welcome and opening. I'll reflect on a few of Betty's comments just in the sense of framing our agenda today. Again, this program that we're talking about today is the Business and Industry CARES Act program. The business and industry now would have what's called a suite of programs. We have our standard, our regular program, which we're simply going to refer to as the Bni program, and then now the second being that we'll refer to as the Bni CARES Act program. That's going to be our focus today. That are simply a couple of programs now within the suite of programs within the Rural Business Cooperative Service. At the very end, we're going to provide you a couple of resources, some web links, and other information. If you're interested in other programs and other activities that Betty maybe have mentioned across other economic development and supporting programs, infrastructure programs, and whatnot, feel free to, of course, check in on our links on our websites, and we'll provide you some resources as to how to connect to our field office structure as we roll through. But again, today we're going to focus on the Business and Industry CARES Act program. We're going to start off with just a couple of comments as it relates to the Bni General program, because the two programs are related. The Bni CARES Act program has really stood up on the foundation of the Bni program. So we're going to kind of relate to the two a little bit as we walk through this. Most of our conversation today is going to be focused more at the business level, so businesses and ag producers. We know we have some lenders and bankers on the call. The program is a guaranteed loan program. Our guarantees are guarantees of commercial loans. So obviously the applicant or the client to us is the lender. So lenders, if you have more questions around the actual loan side, a little bit more of the provisions, we do have a lender webinar scheduled for tomorrow and a couple that have been already recorded. So we are also available to engage further in that discussion. But today we're going to try to keep a little bit more of a business level discussion kind of rolling forward. For a quick overview of the Bni program, so this is again the standard traditional program. The program now is almost 50 years old, starting in the early 70s. The program typically would focus on guarantees of commercial loans for longer term loans, such as real estate purposes, buildings and improvements, maybe equipment and machinery, and maybe have some components for operating expenses. but generally the loans would be longer-term fixed asset type loans. The Bni CARES Act program is not going to focus on those activities. It's going to focus solely on working capital. So basically providing guarantee on a loan that's made with loan proceeds being used for operating expenses and working capital purposes. And we'll drill into a little bit more detail as to what we mean by that and other qualifying purposes and some of the provisions of the program. Again, the general Bni program, and this also applies for the Bni CARES Act program, is available really to any ownership structure, any legal ownership structure that can operate a business or an enterprise. So most of the clients within the business industry program are for-profit businesses, either organized as sole proprietors, partnerships, LLCs, or other corporations. We could even include loans to publicly traded companies. We do not have size restrictions. It could be any and all sizes of businesses and business activities. Nonprofit organizations, public bodies are also eligible if they operate an enterprise. And by that we mean it could be something like a healthcare facility, an educational facility, or other services that basically generate revenues needed to pay for service. So those types of entities are also eligible for the Bni program, along with cooperatives. And within the Bni program, we refer to ag producers as businesses, as a rural business. So this list doesn't state an ag producer, but an ag producer is eligible under the for-profit business structure. Okay, I missed my lender slide here somewhere. Here we are. Eligible lenders. So again, our program offers a guarantee on a loan made by a commercial lender. In this program, lenders that are basically banks that have a federal or state charter, savings and loans, farm credit system banks, and credit unions. So basically institutions that are under some type of a supervision or oversight of a federal or state agency are automatically eligible for lenders in the program. Basically what that means is they do not need to submit an application to become qualified first. They simply need to submit an application on behalf of their borrower for the program. We would collect the information we need from the lender on the lender perspective as we roll through that application. So in reality, what that means is that while we have a large portfolio of lenders already active in the Bni program, for the Bni CARES Act program, any lender that a business or an ag producer currently works with is eligible for the program. So we highly encourage, if you're interested in the program, working with your lender. If your lender's not familiar with the program, introduce them to us into the program, and we'll help them through the application process and get them up to speed on the program. Okay, a couple of focusing then on the actual Bni CARES Act provisions itself. What this slide is going to, let me back up one, sorry. I'm clicking a little too fast here. So the Bni CARES Act program was stood up, created by the CARES Act in March, mid-March. The Act funded the program with $20 million of budget authority. That supports about $1 billion in lending authority. So the program will have the capacity to guarantee about a total of $1 billion in lending. The program will be available not to exceed the end of September in 2021. However, funds could be utilized prior to that, but the maximum life of the program is September 30 of 2021. We published some rules regarding the program on May 22nd, a week and a half ago, along with a notice which opens the application process. If you're interested in seeing those documents, we have that on our webpage, and we'll provide you the links to that at the end of the program. A couple of highlights on the program. Now this slide shows 7 bullets that really highlight the main differences between the Bni CARES Act program and our regular Bni program. As we walk through this, we'll try to reflect a little bit broader on the Bni program also for those of you that aren't familiar with the program. But the Bni CARES Act program, as I stated earlier, the use of the loan funds must be for working capital purposes, and we'll provide a little bit more detail on that. But in short, it's really anything that would typically qualify as an operating expense for a business, would also include principal payments for any outstanding loans, along with costs associated with recovering from the pandemic. And again, we'll go into a little bit more detail with that. For the lenders out there, the loan has a 90% guarantee, so we'll offer a 90% guarantee on the face amount of the loan. We do charge a 2% guarantee fee, and we also have a renewal fee that we'll show you a little bit later here. But in essence, what the guarantee does is it guarantees the lender of a loss, basically insures the lender against loss of 90% of that loan amount. Again, the program does expand its eligible purposes. Typically, the business and industry program, it cannot finance ag production as a standalone business activity. However, the Bni CARES Act program extended that to include agricultural production as a sole business purpose. So within the Bni CARES Act program, an agricultural producer could apply to a loan to their lender, and that lender obtain a guarantee under the Bni CARES Act program when the loan proceeds are being used for working capital, including working capital for ag production. The terms of the working capital loan are not to exceed 10 years of repayment terms. It's a little bit longer than what we typically would do for a working capital loan. Our standard program limits the repayment terms to 7 years, but the Bni program extends that to 10. It could include up to 3 years of principal deferral and then 7 years of repayment of principal and interest. We do have some capital and equity requirements. Mainly, this is a test or some information that the lender would help you qualify for. We'll show you a few highlights of that. We're not going to get into a lot of detail here. And we also have some collateral requirements. Of course, loan security. Again, we'll provide an overview for your insight as to the program requirements. We're going to use references to maximum loan a couple of different ways. This slide shows a maximum loan amount of $25 million. That's kind of our absolute, but we have a couple of other tests that we need to look at as to at the actual borrower level as to the amount they could qualify for working capital purposes. But just keep in mind that the absolute max is $25 million of a loan amount. And again, for the lenders in the room, the Bni CARES Act provides a 90% guarantee on the loan. We do have a 2% guarantee fee. That's a one-time fee paid at a loan origination when we issue the guarantee. And we also charge a 0.5 of 1%, so 50 basis points renewal fee. That's an annual fee charged based on the unpaid principal balance as of 12/31 of that year. And those fees, that renewal fee then is due in January the following year. Okay, again, just a couple highlights here. The Bni CARES Act eligibility we again refer back to our regulations quite frequently. We'll provide you some links for that as we wrap up the presentation. But again, all eligible borrowers that are eligible for the Bni program are eligible for the Bni CARES Act. We do consider ag producers as a business, so eligible as a rural business. The add-on to the Bni CARES Act is that the business must have been in operation on February 15 of 2020. So the program cannot finance a new startup or business that was not in operating as of mid-February. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn over to David. David Chestnut is our branch chief, really leading and sponsoring, I'm going to call it kind of the paper side of this, so setting up the provisions, the guidance, working with our field team in understanding the program. He's going to walk through the provisions of the program as we roll forward. So David, turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Mark, and thank you very much for everyone joining us. We're now over 800 people in our audience, and we certainly wanted to get this message out as broadly as possible. Just to go over just a little bit of what Mark talked about, basically any legal entity is an eligible borrower under the Bni CARES Act program. I do have to say, though, that our rural development mission is to serve rural communities. So there is a threshold that the business must be located in a rural area. That rural area is generally defined as an area not located in a city with a population of 50,000 or greater, or the urbanized area. And if you have questions on the rural area aspect of this program, we do have basically a map finder on our website that you can check if you feel that you are close to an urbanized area, that you may or may not be eligible for rural development programs, we encourage you to go to that website. But if you're out in the middle of Wyoming, I would assume that you very much can consider yourself rural. We'll go over a couple things. Again, as Mark stated, these Bni CARES Act program loans are only for working capital. The purpose of the program and the loan proceeds must be used to cover the cost of a business to prevent, prepare, and respond to the coronavirus pandemic. So we want you to look at essentially where your business is now, where you're going to end up in the future as far as getting back into business as the normal or the new normal as to where it is. So we want these funds to supplement activities that you're currently undergoing to recover from the pandemic. Loans for working capital, as Mark mentioned, we in the Bni regular program don't get into independent agricultural production, but independent agricultural production working capital funds are eligible under the Bni CARES Act program. And the codicil about an exception is they are eligible for this program if they are not eligible for the Farm Service Agency, which is our sister agency, under their guaranteed loan authority, or is otherwise ineligible for an FSA loan. As an example, the FSA currently has a loan limit of $1.776 million to any agricultural producer. If an agricultural producer needs working capital needs of $2 million, for example, we know that that loan is not eligible for the FSA program, so they would come to the Bni CARES Act program and to our lenders. We do not restrict anyone from going to FSA. If you have a great working relationship with FSA, we encourage you to continue that, but actually going to FSA first or in conjunction with Bni CARES Act program loans, that is not a requirement of our program. Eligible uses, working capital expenses. So this is your wages, your salaries, health care benefits, employee benefits, insurances. We also include on this principal and interest payments on any existing loans that the business has. And these are payments that you need during the pandemic recovery to get your business, again, back to its normal operating standards. We do not, however, allow any Bni CARES Act loan proceeds to go to any payments toward owner or stockholder debt or to any related third-party debts. We do allow payments and loan proceeds to go towards any rent, your mortgage payments, routine maintenance on the building, and things of that nature. That is a working capital expense. Again, we want to cover a business's working capital costs to respond to and recover from the coronavirus pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, this is working capital proceeds to get a business from where they are now to full production, to continuing to operate as a successful and sustainable business going forward. Other eligible uses include taxes, utilities, business inventory. For our ag producers out there, ag production expenses can be your inventory, your feed, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, livestock, and of course your labor costs of getting through the working capital period from there. We also, Mark mentioned the loan fee. It's a 2% guarantee fee of the guaranteed amount. That is an eligible expense that can be included in your Bni CARES Act program loan, and loan-related expenses. That would be if you needed to obtain an appraisal on your collateral or do anything related to the loan. Those also can be included in the eligible uses of Bni CARES Act proceeds. Ineligible loan purposes, we do have a list of ineligible proceeds in our regular Bni program. That I have a citation here, 4279.117 in our regulation. There are a variety of ineligible purposes and entity types that we are not allowed to make loans to. We are not allowed to make any loans for businesses involved in illegal substances. And I would just go out and say that any marijuana dispensary at this point would not be an eligible borrower for the federal government programs. You are not allowed to make any acquisitions of businesses. You are not allowed to make any fixed asset purchases, such as land, building, or equipment, or other capital expenses in there. Again, this is a working capital only program. We will allow some debt refinancing, but there is a provision that any such debt must be for debts incurred after February 15th of 2020 and also for eligible purposes. So if there were working capital expenses where you borrowed money after February 15th of 2020, those would be eligible to be refinanced within the Bni CARES Act program. Mark talked about maximum loan amount. We do have, and he mentioned a couple ways that we talked about maximum loan amount. Again, we do have a hard statutory that any one borrower may not exceed $25 million in Bni loans. That includes Bni CARES Act program loans as a loan amount. This is the aggregate amount of all Bni loans to one borrower, so that we may have some existing businesses out there that are currently a Bni borrower. The total of any Bni regular program funds and Bni CARES Act program funds cannot exceed $25 million to any one borrower. The Bni CARES Act program loan amount, we want businesses to forecast the amount of funds that they will need to recover from the economic impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. We're not stating how long this will take because that's a case-by-case situation for your particular business. It may be a year, it may be shorter or longer, but essentially what amount is needed to cover a business's working capital needs until their revenues recover, the business is sustainable, and they're able to meet their working capital expenses through their standard and normal revenues. Lenders are there to assist any businesses with this calculation. We need to look at, what revenues are you expected to receive and what are your working capital expenses while you recover. We fully anticipate that the expenses you need going forward would be reduced over time as your revenues increase with the recovery of the economy. To calculate where our maximum loan amount is, there are two calculations that are important. We do a test to see what the maximum amount of the Bni CARES Act program loan would be. This we take as 12 times the borrower's total average monthly working capital expenses. Then we deduct the amount of any SBA loans, SBA PPP loans, the Payroll Protection Act loans, or other federal assistance that's been received to cover working capital or any COVID-19 related expenses. In essence, we're not double dipping on any federal programs, but we're using this as a calculation to determine the maximum amount eligible for your business under the Bni CARES Act program. But this is not necessarily the amount that you may need to borrow. The second calculation is the most important of these calculations, and that's the lower part here, that the loan will be based on a cash flow analysis and not greater than the amount needed to cure problems caused by the emergency. So when we calculate that amount, that's the amount we want you to borrow. We do want you to know that, we understand that projections aren't always met exactly. So if a business, we were to calculate a maximum eligible amount based on the average working capital expenses of the business, you were to make a forecast about what you need, and then you find that you do need additional. If there is room between what you have borrowed from the Bni CARES Act program and what we've calculated as your maximum eligible Bni CARES Act loan amount, we can do a second loan to get you back through the pandemic. As long as the total doesn't exceed the maximum eligible amount per our average working capital calculation. I want to just kind of show you a chart, just kind of how you would calculate it if a business has For example, $100,000 in average working capital expenses each month times 12 is $1.2 million. If they receive a $250,000 SBA PPP loan, then the maximum loan amount for our calculation is $950,000. I want to talk a little bit about the loan itself. The loan from your lender, the loan proceeds must be dispersed through multiple draws on an as-needed monthly basis. We're not going to determine, what the amount of those monthly draws are. We're not stipulating that they be an exact same amount during the duration of your recovery. As I mentioned before, the amount that you need to supplement your revenues to cover your working capital expenses while you recover should decline over a period of time. But you will negotiate this with your lender as it relates to the multiple draws required. You are not allowed to make a full and complete disbursement of all the loan proceeds at loan closing. We want you to use these on a monthly basis or as needed to recover from the coronavirus impacts. All loans are set up to have a 10-year maximum repayment term. Generally, in our regular Bni program, the maximum loan term for working capital purposes is 7 years. So we're looking at a 10-year maximum on the Bni CARES Act program loans. We also are allowing deferrals, payment deferrals on Bni CARES Act program loan. We can defer interest payments for up to 12 months from loan origination. We can also defer principal payments on Bni CARES Act program loans for a term up to 3 years. So in essence, as the business recovers, we're not going to put additional working capital burden on them by requiring payments of principal and interest during the first year. And then by the second year, the business would be required to pay interest payments on the balance outstanding and then start principal repayment after 3 years. All loans must be fully amortized by 10 years. We do not allow any balloon payments in our loans. At the time of application, the business should let the lender know, and the lender will let the agency know what the loan repayments terms are, including any negotiated payment deferrals requested by the borrower. All of our Bni loans can be either a fixed or a variable rate. The interest rate is negotiated between the lender and the borrower. In the application that the lender submits to the agency, they'll let us know what the interest rate terms are of that particular loan. We do let the lenders know that the interest rate cannot adjust more frequently than quarterly for the term of these loans. All of our Bni CARES Act loans must be adequately secured, and the Bni CARES Act loans, businesses must have equity and a positive equity balance in their business. We have a 10% balance sheet equity requirement. So if you look at your business balance sheet, in essence, you're going to take the total assets minus total liabilities to come to an equity amount. If that equity amount is more than 10% of your business assets, then you've met the equity requirements of the Bni program. So this is one thing that we do have. We have 3 different ways to calculate equity. If you're a lender or you have questions, we can address those on a case-by-case or business basis. We look at 10% of total fixed assets or contributing 10% or more to the total project costs. So if your project costs, for example, in the example where there's $1.2 million of working capital need and you got an SBA PPP loan of $250,000, that can be considered part of contributed capital to the project, and then thus meeting the capital and equity requirement of the program. And I think I'm going to turn this over, and I know we've got some questions in there, and I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Morris, I believe, who is in there. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and have him go through a couple more slides.
Well, I think before we, Aaron's to speak to the application process a little bit. Before we do that, I thought I'd do is just kind of wrap back through and just highlight some of the comments and provisions that David just gave you to address kind of broadly the types of questions coming through. Again, just as a highlight, the borrower can be any really legal form of a business structure. So it could be a sole proprietorship, could be a partnership, an LLC, an LLP, a corporation, C or S corp. Any legal structure is eligible. Could be a for-profit, could be a nonprofit, could be a public entity that would be eligible as long as you're operating some type of an enterprise that generates revenues to repay debt. The type of or the purpose of that business, we're putting a lot of emphasis on ag production. Ag producers and ag production is one eligible purpose. So again, working capital loans to support agricultural production. While we are USDA, we do not solely work on ag production or agriculture. It could be related to other agribusinesses, processing or servicing for agricultural related, or it could be non-ag. Other businesses in rural communities also would qualify. Could be related to energy sector, could be manufacturing, hotels, restaurants, any really business service, almost any business service in a rural community is eligible. David mentioned that there are a few types that are not eligible. There are very few. Mainly it's housing, like rental housing, apartment housing are not eligible for BNI. Golf courses are not eligible for BNI. But generally any other business purpose would be a eligible purpose within the BNI program. The loan itself, David went through that a application would have to document their need for the funds. And as you noted, the maximum that a business could borrow is really 12 months of operating and eligible costs, principal payments and working capital costs. That 12-month figure would assume that the working capital loan is paying 100% for those costs. Hopefully, businesses are generating some revenues and some income and will not need to be borrowing 100% of working capital costs from month to month so that the loan amount could be utilized over a period of more than 12 months. So if a business, let's say you needed 18 months of some type of support through working capital loans, and maybe it's only 10% of your cost at the tail end of that, but still it could be that the loan funds could be drawn over a period of longer than 12 months. Could be a couple months, could be much longer, depending on the business and your need, again, for the working capital purposes. So I think that's what I was trying to do is just kind of rephrase, I think, some of David's comments to offer some broad perspectives on questions. Why don't we roll through the application process a little bit, and then we'll have, I think, Kate and our facilitator will kind of walk through and try to pick up more of the questions that maybe we haven't addressed yet. We're having a lot of questions come in. We're not going to get to all of them, but we'll try to cover at least broadly as we can. So, Aaron, I'll turn it to you on the application process and some resources.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Aaron Morris. I'm the director of our guaranteed lending programs here at USDA's Rural Business Cooperative Service. Now that Mark and David have given you kind of the guide rails to how to, the policies behind the program, now it's actually time to apply for the BNI CARES Act loan. Just want to remind you all that the lender is the applicant in this program. Borrowers are working with lenders. Lenders are receiving a loan note guarantee. Lenders can apply through our state offices. The best part, I think, about Rural Business Cooperative Services is our delivery system and our ability to kind of have a localized delivery system with our 47 different state offices and the area offices within those state offices that allow our customers not to have to go far to get service through our agency. So those applications will be received through a state office. The agency are going to consider applications on a first-come, first-served basis. However, if funds become limited towards the end of this funding cycle, and the end of the funding cycle is September 30th, 2021, we could assign priority to some of those applications as they come in. Those priority would include criteria that include population, demographics, loan features, whether it's a high-impact business investment, or there could be some other administrative priorities that we assign at that time. We will make sure that there is ample notice for both lenders and borrowers prior to us having to assigned priority if funds should become limited. Just one other note is that for the purpose of agricultural production, which is a new purpose for the Bni CARES Act program, we've limited that to half of the total funding that's available, so that's about $475.5 million. This could change if there's strong demand for agricultural production guarantee loans, and we'll make a notice available in the Federal Register should that change. Lastly, those of you who may already have experience with the Bni program, the answer is, or you may have additional needs beyond working capital. Yes, you can combine a Bni CARES Act loan, which is for working capital, with a Bni guarantee loan program, which is our regular program, if you have additional capital needs for perhaps real estate or other improvements for a rural business. The one caveat is that if you're going to apply for both, you have to be able to meet the provisions of both programs. And Dave and Mark have outlined the provisions, but each loan would have to meet the provisions of both programs in order to apply for both. I'm just going to give you a couple of different resources, links and contacts for the program. The actual regulation for it can be found here at this link, and I believe we'll be making this presentation available for you all after the webinar. But here's the link to the regulation, as well as the notice that was published in the Federal Register announcing the Bni CARES Act program. And lastly, for any other information on all of our programs, or just the Bni CARES Act program or other business programs, you can visit our website at rd.usda.gov. As I mentioned earlier, our delivery system is a network of 47 different state offices. Here's the website to those state offices. You can find contact information for each state. Also, USDA's coronavirus response page. Please visit that as well if you need additional information beyond what we're offering here at USDA Rural Development. If you have any questions beyond this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. Points of contact are here on this slide. You can reach out to me, Aaron Morris, or you can reach out to David Chestnut as well, who you heard from earlier. With that, I'll end my remarks and I'll pass it back over to Kate, who will facilitate some Q&A for us to wrap up the webinar. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. And yes, we do have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll get started right on them. Is there any potential that these loans will be forgiven?
Okay, so this is Mark, and I'll try to start answering some questions, and as we need more detail, I'll turn over to David and Aaron, so they're going to be ready to help out. But for this program does not have debt forgiveness or any provisions for a reduction of principal or interest. So the rates and terms are established by the lender, really negotiated between the borrower and lender. Generally, with the guarantee, the loan is of lower risk to the lender, so most lenders will price the interest rate accordingly and offer a little bit better interest rate than they would at a higher risk loan. So while we don't have forgiveness, the guarantee should offer some benefits on an interest rate structure, but again, that needs to be negotiated between the borrower and the lender.
Great, thank you. If I am a farmer, how would my regular banker and collateral agreement be handled with a Bni loan?
So again, we strongly recommend that ag producers, businesses with existing loans, with banks or other lenders, work with that lender. If you're interested in a working capital loan, they can work with our office then on a guarantee for that type of activity. In sense of structuring existing loans with a new Bni CARES Act loan, it really depends on the lender of how they want to structure that. We are able to enable the lender to secure the loan with a junior lien position for the Bni CARES Act program. So we have quite a bit of flexibility about how to structure that. But it's really going to come down to the lender themselves. If you have multiple lenders involved, there may be needing to have some basically some inter-lender agreements. But really it's up to the lender how to structure the loan along with existing loans. If for some reason a lender is not interested in the working capital loan, but you have other lenders that are, we could work with a new lender for you and also add that to your mix of credit. So we have quite a bit of flexibility how to structure the Bni CARES Act program.
Great. Can an ethanol plant apply for this Bni loan?
Certainly. Again, any business structure and most business purposes in a rural community could be eligible. Processing, such as ethanol, other manufacturing, are eligible for the program. We had some other questions come in as far as different types of agriculture, such as hydroponics or aquaculture. Again, that's all eligible. So again, while it's a USDA program, it does not have to be related to agriculture, but it could be. Okay.
Can the loans be established on future needs, once approved by USDA, be used for draws against working capital needs?
Absolutely. But David, you want to walk through again a little bit as to establishing need, talk about the draws and how that piece of the program would work?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. The Bni CARES Act program is strictly for working capital purposes, as I mentioned, to supplement working capital to get your business back to where it's fully sustainable and profitable. So the draws can be used only for working capital purposes, and they are drawn as your business needs them. You can work that out with your lender, but you may want to forecast, as we say, forecast for at least a year out, or how long you think it may take for your business to recover to where you have profitability and cash flow in excess of your expenses, and determine what that amount is, and then draw as you need it during that term. So it is a forecast amount. You can work with your lender or come in with some idea of how much money you need, and then forecast out and make draws compliant with your lender and agree to that. I will say also that for lenders out there, when draws are made on these loans, they do not need concurrence of USDA rule development. We're the lenders are in charge of the loan once the loan is made, as far as all servicing provisions, and that includes disbursements. I would say that as a borrower, come in with a need, your documented need. I need X amount of dollars because I've got rent, payroll, I've got an insurance premium due, I've got other things that I need assistance with. Again, this is supplemental to hopefully what your revenues are providing to you going forward. But this is a draw note for working capital expenses.
And I'll just kind of add to that. I think addressing a few questions as relates to, again, around need. But if a business received assistance through SBA, either the PPP or the economic disaster loans, again, those programs also, of course, support need. But if the business has more, a need for working capital beyond those programs, again, they would be eligible for the Bni CARES Act program. So we can co-fund projects similarly with FSA, the Farm Service Administration. So a producer eligible for FSA, as David mentioned, if the request is for more than what they can provide, or if the producer otherwise not eligible for FSA, we can come into the Bni CARES Act program. But there may be some needs that are better served by FSA, and you could work with both FSA for some financial needs and for the Bni CARES Act program at the same time to help out with needs. Okay.
Great, thank you. And how quickly can the loan requests be processed?
All right. Aaron, you want to talk a little bit again to processing and application and how all that works?
Sure. The overarching goal is to get funds into the hands of businesses as quickly as we can. Once a lender gets a completed application to our state office, we are trying to process those applications within 5 business days. Hopefully from the time that we receive the application till you all being able to get funds in your hands, we're hoping that businesses can close within lenders can close these loans within 5 days.
Great, thank you. Scrolling up just a little bit here. trying to make sure we get some that are going to have the highest amount of interest to multiple people. What are the collateral requirements, please?
Okay, again, the loan needs to be fully secured. However, any collateral, that or property and assets that the business owns can be pledged as collateral. So it could be equity that's in real estate, could be equipment or other chattels, could be inventory, receivables, would all count and be valued as collateral for the loan proceeds. If a lender, again, if the collateral, if the property already serves as collateral for other loans, if there's equity beyond that loan, the existing loan amount, that equity could serve as collateral for the Bni CARES Act program. Okay.
If a borrower has been forgiven on their PPP loan, does that change how you calculate the eligible loan amount for the Bni CARES loan?
So no, if a business that received a PPP loan, that loan amount would be netted out of what they're eligible for as far as the maximum amount of the Bni CARES Act. And of course, if they're forgiven, this means they drew the funds and used the funds for payroll or other working capital purposes. So you would expect that they would need less on the Bni CARES Act program, but it would count the same, regardless if it's forgiven or an outstanding debt, in the sense of that it's a loan received from SBA through the PPP program. Okay?
Yeah. And do you have a list of lenders?
All right, again, on the processing side, Aaron, how would you suggest a business look for a lender in the program?
Start local, but no, I would work with our local offices for lenders that frequent the Bni program within that state. Small community banks that work with the program. I would start with our local offices.
Right, so I would remind us to work with your lender today if you have a lender, but if you need to go beyond that lender, then Aaron is definitely correct in the sense of a great approach is to just contact our local office as to who they work with. But in reality, any lender, again, that has some type of a supervision or oversight by a federal or state agency would qualify for the program. If they're not familiar with it, our field office structure is there to help work with lenders to access the program.
We need to procure additional equipment for the ag production component of our business as an operating expense for the next 12 months. Am I hearing this loan will not permit that? Thank you.
All right, so the Bni CARES Act loan is only for working capital purposes. So if you need to borrow funds for equipment, other fixed assets, so basically assets that are either amortized over time, depreciated over time, paid over time, those types of loan purposes would not qualify for the Bni CARES Act program. Again, if it's an ag producer, they may qualify for FSA. We would encourage you to look at that. The Bni program, the standard Bni program, would be an opportunity for other businesses. The standard Bni program cannot fund or finance production agriculture as a sole purpose, but it can assist in other business activities, processing, agribusiness, and any rural business going forward. But it's correct that the Bni CARES Act is only for working capital purposes.
Okay, thank you. Can churches apply?
David, you want to address churches and maybe a few other types of entities or purposes that would not be eligible?
Yeah, any entity that is inherently religious in nature is not an eligible applicant for the Bni CARES Act program or the Bni program. We will allow, for example, a church could apply if they were operating, let's say, a daycare facility center where there were no religious services conducted or no religious component to it, but they may own a daycare facility, for example. That business itself may be eligible for Bni CARES Act program. Churches are generally not eligible, but there may be some isolated case-by-case basis where a business at the church operates with no religious component would be eligible. I also say that casinos are not eligible. Gaming enterprises are not eligible. Any entity where more than 10% of the revenues are generated by gambling activity, including lottery proceeds, those businesses are not eligible. But again, in general, any business entity is eligible.
Great, thank you. Aside from the CARES Act, does USDA have plans to consider incentives for regular BNI lending, such as higher guarantee percentages, lower guarantee fees, to provide further relief for the COVID crisis?
Well, unfortunately, right now, we don't have authority to make changes to the standard Bni program. We do have authority on some emergency basis for some of the servicing activities. In other words, looking at repayments, reamortizations, kind of helping with existing loans. But as far as rolling forward with new loan activity, pretty much we're committed to the program as it stood up through the appropriations process. Now this, of course, program rolls through the fiscal year. Congress always could decide to provide additional authorities or other programs, but right now we're pretty limited on the existing program.
Okay, thank you. Would I be eligible for 2 loans as I own my own farm and also have another business that does not relate to the farm?
Hey, David, would you like to kind of address? Somebody's getting creative, but basically a structure of different.
Yeah, if you have 2 different businesses, you can make an application for each of those businesses. One for the agricultural production working capital needs, and one for your other business working capital needs.
Okay.
And I would add that
does the owner of the business? Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to add if they each operate independent, so if they're truly separate businesses, they would each qualify under the maximum term. So, if they're both larger businesses, they each could qualify up to $25 million, and each would be tested, based on the Bni CARES Act qualifications as far as maximum loans separately. Okay.
Does the owner of the business need to provide a personal guarantee to be eligible to receive the loan?
Okay, David, can I turn over to you? And just as a heads up, David, I need to also duck out for a second. So if you can take over.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, and thank you for the question, and thank you, Mark, for your time. The guarantee question, that's pretty much, that's also negotiated with the lender, but we do require that any owner of a business that owns 20% or more of the business is required to provide a personal or corporate guarantee of any loans to that borrower. So yes, a guarantee would be required if the ownership percentage is more than 20%.
Okay, thank you. Can shareholder debt be subordinated and counted as equity?
It can be subordinated and counted as equity, but we cannot use Bni CARES Act proceeds to make any payments on those loans. And subordinated debt would count toward the equity component, yes.
Do lenders collect, spread, and submit to the agency all borrower affiliates, or is there some discretion allowed by the lender, such as lender only analyzes those affiliates owned 20% or more by the borrower?
I'll let Aaron jump in on that, but the BNI, we require that we receive current financial statements on the business and affiliates. And go ahead, Aaron.
No, we would see all the affiliates that are related to the business.
Okay.
So we would need those.
Yeah. And what is the draw period? Is it 1 year?
The draw period is extended for the amount of time that the business needs to recover from the coronavirus pandemic, the economic impacts of that. We established a year as saying that's pretty typical. that hopefully by June of 2021, our economy is back to full strength and all businesses are recovered. But it's going to be individual to each business as to how long that recovery may be made. When a draw note is extended by a lender to a borrower, it's a one-time draw. So you can draw funds, and once you've drawn it, you cannot draw those funds again. It's not a revolving line of credit, but there is no end to the time that you may draw eligible funds. That is up to the maximum loan amount.
Okay. I do want to point out that we are about a minute over time, and I believe that we have extended our time here so that we can continue to answer questions, at least for a little while longer, for those who are able to stay. The primary information intended to be provided by this webinar has already been provided, and so if you do have to leave, you have already received all that information. I want to remind folks that within 48 hours, there will be a link provided to a recording of this webinar, that there will be slides of the PowerPoint made available, and questions that we don't get to today will be answered through email. So going on for another question. Could you please clarify what sort of collateral is considered eligible?
Eligible collateral would be real estate, equipment, inventory, accounts receivable. So we predominantly look at fixed assets as a preferred method of collateral, but basically business collateral is what we're looking at. So whatever your business owns and whatever you need to pledge with a value equal to the loan amount, that's what we're looking at.
If I am projecting a drastic downturn in my quarter 3 and 4, could I apply for this to use during those quarters?
You would project your working capital needs to recover from the pandemic, and if you're anticipating a downturn, that should be part of your calculation as to the total dollar amount of need.
And can we purchase livestock and equipment with funds from a Kerr Act loan?
Livestock would be a working capital expense if you are a breeder or growing livestock as your agricultural production. The purchase of equipment would not be eligible.
Okay. I had to make an interest payment a couple days ago. Will that payment that I have already paid be considered for reimbursement from the CARES Act?
It was made an expense, a working capital expense, after February 15th of 2020, yes. That should be included in your calculation as to the immediate need of working capital funds, included as part of your overall need to recover.
Okay. Are there any restrictions on lending for operating expenses to agricultural operations that raise livestock on contract, packer-owned animals?
I don't believe we have any specific restrictions. Now, this is where we may need to rely on our friends from the FSA office who are used to dealing more in the agricultural production and the nuances of what a working capital expense is from that. But we don't have any restrictions on working capital or operating expenses for a business.
Okay, and this one is about tribal communities. Are tribal communities eligible to apply for community development capital? These entities are federally tax exempt under IRC Section 7871. Can you fund businesses of these organizations?
We are not allowed to guarantee a loan where the interest is tax exempt. So if the tribal nation were to borrow as a tax exempt entity where the interest paid on that loan is tax exempt, we could not guarantee that loan. but certainly tribal entities are eligible borrowers. And for tribal businesses, what they do, the exception to that would be, of course, a tribal casino. But for standard operating expenses for a tribally owned business, that is an eligible purpose and an eligible entity.
Okay. This is a double checking. The Bni Cares program is still based on receiving an approval from a primary lender. Thus, standard lending guidelines will still apply, correct?
Very good and astute question, and thanks for bringing that up. Yes, we guarantee loans that are made by lenders. So the lenders will undergo their standard credit criterion and analysis of the business prior to submitting an application to the agency for us to guarantee their loan. And I do emphasize that this is the lender's loan to the borrower. We are just an entity providing a Bni Cares Act program loan guarantee to minimize the lender's credit risk for a business that may not be receiving a whole lot of revenues at the current time.
Okay. So I think we have time for a few more questions here, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Is the local foods rural area exemption eligible under Bni Cares Act?
Yeah, yes, that exception for local food distribution is still in effect.
Can the 2% guarantee fee be rolled into the loan package?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that is an eligible cost. That's a loan cost.
Okay. You know, I think we're coming just about down to our first set of them. So this might be a good place to go ahead and say thank you for today. And Dave, I'll turn it over to you for an official wrap up. But thank you so much for the extra time you've taken to answer all of these questions. And thank you to those who stayed online because of their interest. Dave?
Kate, thank you very much. And again, we want to sincerely thank all of you for joining us today. We hope we've answered most of your questions related to the program. As Aaron mentioned, we have state offices. We have 47 state offices across the country. They may not be on their desk, but we are continuing to deliver our programs through our quarantine in various effects. Aaron, myself, and Mark Brodzinski were all located in the national office in Washington, D.C. We haven't seen each other face-to-face for going on a couple months now, but we're still getting our programs delivered. So we appreciate you staying with us. I will say there was a question in there as far as is a foreign entity eligible. We do allow a foreign-owned entity to be an eligible Bni borrower or Bni Cares Act program borrower so long as the loan proceeds and the collateral for that project is located within the United States or one of the territories. So they are eligible. We thank you again for your time, Kate, for your time as well. And thank you and have a great day and stay healthy.